The Black Death, the measles, polio, smallpox. We all have heard these words at least once in our lives, being used in our world history classes, on the news, or in an article we've read. But have we ever seen them in their truest form? Most likely not. Because in our modern day, science has provided us with different methods of combating these infectious diseases. From the day we were born, we were administered with vaccines for polio, the measles, hepatitis B, etc. And as many of us might remember, we have had to go to the doctor's office to get our shots before enrolling in school, going overseas, and even before coming to college. So why are infectious diseases still a huge problem? Why are we always a few steps behind when a new strain of infection pops up? Why can't we be a step ahead? These are some of the many questions people have been trying to answer for centuries. Nevertheless, as of fall of 2017, we may have come up with a solution. But before we get into that, let us refresh our memories with some background information.
A disease is any condition in which the normal structure or functions of the body are damaged or impaired. An infection is a successful colonization of a host by a microorganism. Infections can lead to disease. An infectious disease is any disease caused by the direct effect of a pathogen. Before we get into solving the problem of infectious diseases, we should first go over the background and mechanism of infectious agents. There are 6 major categories of infectious agents or pathogens: viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, helminths, and prions. Viruses make us sick by killing cells or disrupting cell function. Viruses come in many forms and are simply packets of nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, surrounded by a protein shell and sometimes lipids. A virus is a dormant particle lacking the necessary resources for reproduction. Thus, when it enters a host cell, it hijacks the metabolic machinery of the cell to produce copies of itself until it bursts out of the cell or butt off the cell membrane. Viruses are responsible for a wide range of diseases, including the common cold, measles, chickenpox, genital herpes, and influenza. Bacteria make us sick in the same way viruses do, but also harbor other strategies at their disposal. They may sometimes multiply so rapidly that they crowd out host tissues and disrupt normal function. They may sometimes kill cells and tissue outright or even make toxins that can paralyze, destroy cells' metabolic machinery, or precipitate a massive immune reaction that is itself toxic. Bacterial infections are associated with diseases such as strep throat, tuberculosis, and staph skin infections. Fungi work similarly to bacteria in that spores of a fungus are often exposed to the body through inhalation or through direct contact with the surface of the body, primarily the skin. Once the spores are inhaled into the lungs or come in contact with the skin, it germinates and transforms into budding yeast cells. These budding yeast cells then proceed to disrupt normal cell and tissue functions. Fungal infections usually begin in the lungs or on the skin. An example of a fungal infection is histoplasmosis, which is caused by the fungus Histoplasma capsulatum that grows in soil contaminated with bird or bat droppings. Protozoa are single-celled organisms that infect and replicate in a host. In the case of the protozoa that causes malaria, sporozoites, the stage of the parasites that infect new hosts, first develop in the salivary glands of Anopheles mosquitoes. They leave the mosquito during a blood meal from a human, finds and enters liver cells in the human body, and multiply rapidly. Cells infected with sporozoites eventually burst as merozoites, leading to cell death and disruption of normal body function. The merozoites then go on to infect red blood cells and rapidly reproduce asexually. The host red blood cells are destroyed in the process, which releases many new merozoites that go on to find new blood-borne hosts. Helminths, or worms, usually infect the body encased in cysts. The larvae then leave the cysts to various parts of the body, often to the intestines where they molt, mature, and ultimately produce more larvae that pass through the intestinal walls into the bloodstream. From there, they are free to reach various organs. Helminths feed on living hosts, receiving nourishment and protection while disrupting their host's nutrient absorption. They may also disrupt various organ functions, leading to symptoms and possibly death. Lastly, prions are a newly recognized class of infectious agents. They are thought to cause variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans and mad cow disease in cattle. Prions are abnormally folded proteins, and when they come in contact with similar normal proteins, turn them into prions like themselves, setting off a chain reaction that causes damage to the host, riddling the brain with holes. Prions evoke no immune response and resist heat, ultraviolet light, radiation, and sterilization, making them difficult to control. From all these classes, There is a common mechanism of how infectious agents infect and propagate. In order to survive and multiply in a host, a successful pathogen must be able to 1. Colonize a host, 2. Find a nutritionally compatible niche in the host body, 3. Avoid, subvert, or circumvent the host's innate and adaptive immune responses, 4. Replicate using host resources, and 5. Exit and spread to a new host.
430 BC was the earliest recorded date of an infectious disease outbreak, with the emergence of smallpox, which is a disease caused by the variola virus and was transmitted by skin-to-skin contact, by bodily fluids, or by air. In 541 AD, the plague of Justinian, one of history's deadliest plagues, occurred, killing approximately between 30 and 50 million people, which was about half the world's population at the time. The plague was spread to humans by rodents, whose fleas carried the bacteria Yersinia pestis. In 1334, the same bacteria caused the bubonic plague, better known as the Black Death. It was reported that an estimated 75 million to 200 million died in Eurasia because of the infection. About 400 years later, the yellow fever epidemic, a viral infection caused by the flavivirus, reached Philadelphia and killed 5,000 of the total population. The last outbreak of yellow fever in the U.S. was recorded in 1905, but there is still an estimated 200,000 cases of yellow fever and 30,000 deaths a year. We see the next large-scale outbreak in 1918, following World War I with the Great Flu Pandemic of 1918 and 1919, which killed an estimated 30 million to 50 million people worldwide. In 1952, we see the peak of polio in the U.S., infecting 60,000 children and killing more than 3,000 of them. This spurred the March of Dimes movement, and 3 years later, a vaccine was created. Not long after, however, in 1984, HIV made its first appearance from chimpanzees. More than 25 million people have died of AIDS caused by HIV since the first cases were reported. Today, more than 35 million people around the world are living with the infection. Even more recently, in 2009, we still see the impact of infectious diseases, with the global H1N1 swine flu pandemic killing as many as 575,000 people. A year later, cholera was responsible for the deaths of about 10,000 people in Haiti following the deadly earthquake. In the same year, measles killed 122,000 people, tuberculosis 1.3 million, and typhoid fever 260,000 people. And now in 2017, we have the rise of the Zika virus, the first mosquito-borne disease to cause microcephaly. It is predicted that 3 to 4 million would be infected within a year, making the World Health Organization declare it as a public health emergency. But what is causing so many deaths around the world? What has caused infectious disease to continuously be a huge problem? First of all, infectious diseases can be passed on from one person to another invisibly as soon as there is contact. For example, they are passed on from places people touch often, through the air, and through fluids. In addition, there is always a threat of reemergence of bacteria strains. But this raises the question of why are infectious diseases still a problem today when they have been killing and infecting mankind since its existence? One answer to this question is that it takes some time before an accurate diagnosis of an infectious disease can be made. Another reason was an innovation gap that happened from the early 1960s to 2000, which drug companies did not want to pour millions of dollars into drug development for infectious diseases because of the loss in profit. Bacteria and viruses rapidly mutate and become stronger and more resilient to existing antibiotics in a short period of time. Even for long-term illnesses like cancer, the research and development and the phase trials are already long and costly processes before the FDA approves or denies a drug. And now, a nightmare bacteria superbug was found to be resistant to a last-ditch antibiotic called colistin just last year in the U.S. Dr. Tom Frieden, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, ominously stated, "If this kind of superbug spreads, then we will be taken back to a time where there was no antibiotics."
In order to address the issue of infectious diseases, there have been solutions over the years, such as vaccinations, prevention by practicing good hygiene techniques, and providing community health education. First, let's take a look at what vaccinations are and how they work. When foreign invaders, such as bacteria or viruses, enter the body, immune cells called lymphocytes respond by producing antibodies, which are protein molecules. These antibodies fight the invader, known as an antigen, and protect against further infection. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a healthy individual can produce millions of antibodies a day, fighting infections so efficiently that people never even know they were exposed to an antigen. Unfortunately, the first time the body faces a particular invader, it can take several days to ramp up this antibody response. For antigens like the measles virus or whooping cough bacteria, a few days is too long. The infection can spread and kill the person before the immune system can fight back. Vaccines are made of dead or weakened antigens. They can't cause an infection, but the immune system still sees them as an invader and produces antibodies in response. After the threat has passed, many of the antibodies will break down, but immune cells called memory cells remain in the body. When the body encounters that antigen again, the memory cells produce antibodies fast and strike down the invader before it's too late. Vaccines also work on a community level. Some people can't be vaccinated either because they are too young or because their immune systems are too weak, according to the CDC. But if everyone around them is vaccinated, unvaccinated people are protected by something called herd immunity. In other words, they're unlikely to even come in contact with the disease, so they probably won't get sick. There are vaccinations for some of the most widespread diseases such as chickenpox, measles, tetanus, meningitis, shingles, mumps, hepatitis, influenza, whooping cough, and HPV. A second way to prevent the spread of infections is to keep germs at bay by following good personal hygiene habits. It's important to prevent infection before it begins and to avoid spreading it to others with these techniques. Washing your hands after using the bathroom and before preparing or eating food. You should also wash up after blowing your nose, coughing or sneezing, feeding or stroking your pet, or visiting or caring for a sick person. Covering a cough. You should cover your mouth and nose with a tissue when you sneeze or cough, then dispose of it. If you don't have a tissue, then cough or sneeze into your elbow rather than into your hands. Washing and bandaging all cuts. Avoiding picking at healing wounds. Not sharing dishes, glasses, or eating utensils. Avoiding direct contact with napkins, tissues, handkerchiefs, or similar items used by others. Finally, health education is a powerful tool to help reduce the spread of infectious diseases. This is extremely important in communities facing poverty and for populations that have a lack of education. Public education campaigns are important to illustrate the importance and safety of vaccinations, monitoring of vaccination rates and their impact on health outcomes, and limited exceptions for individuals who, for medical or religious reasons, wish to avoid vaccinations. Over the last 2 decades, increasing emphasis has been placed on health communication strategies that are designed, implemented, and evaluated. Consequently, various successful strategic health communications campaigns have been developed, notably in the area of HIV. The importance of increased awareness in patients, caregivers, and the community is clear and will have far-reaching effects for future generations. By raising awareness within the community, this will influence case detection and raise the profile of the disease. Therefore, it is important that communities' efforts be designed effectively to achieve the desired health outcomes.
At the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the FDA approved a tablet medication called pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, in 2004. If one pill is taken every day while engaging in behavior at risk for HIV, PrEP is proven to be 92 to 99% effective in preventing HIV from developing. So how does PrEP work in preventing HIV? PrEP has 2 major active ingredients, emtricitabine and tenofovir disoproxil fumarate, that prevent the replication of the HIV virus. Both compounds act as competitive inhibitors to the natural substrates in human bodies. Emtricitabine, a synthetic analog of cytidine, is phosphorylated by cellular enzymes to form emtricitabine 5-triphosphate, which inhibits activity of HIV-1 reverse transcriptase by competing with the natural substrate and by being incorporated into developing viral DNA, resulting in chain termination. Tenofovir disoproxil fumarate, an analog of adenosine monophosphate, works in a similar way, in that it is phosphorylated by cellular enzymes to form tenofovir diphosphate. Tenofovir diphosphate also inhibits HIV-1 reverse transcriptase activity by competing with the natural substrate, incorporating itself into the DNA, and ultimately leading to DNA chain termination. In combination, emtricitabine and tenofovir disoproxil have showed synergistic antiviral effects. Combined, these drugs work to inhibit HIV reverse transcriptase, which ultimately stops the HIV virus from replicating. If PrEP is taken 7 days a week, the level of protection is 99%. If taken 4 days a week, the level of protection is still high, at 96%. If only 2 pills are taken every week, the level of protection is 76%. Because of interventions like these, HIV incidences and diagnoses are finally decreasing in the United States. From 2010 to 2014, the estimated number of annual HIV infections has decreased 10%, and these types of drug interventions offer hope for an HIV-free world. Sadly, HIV isn't the only infectious disease out there. There are so many more infectious diseases that ravage our planet, and together, we need to find a way to stop them. If PrEP has been proven to be effective against HIV, what if we took its mechanism and adopted it towards other infectious diseases to create a pill that stops viral diseases from replicating in our bodies?
We propose a solution, a pill that takes the advantages of the PrEP pill and modifies it to help infectious diseases in general. This pill provides 2 lines of defense for maximum protection. The first line of defense is genetically modifying the 2 active compounds found in PrEP to block the necessary enzymes needed for viral replication. For RNA viruses, this pill will target reverse transcriptase enzymes the virus needs in order to transcribe its RNA to DNA. For DNA viruses, this pill will target DNA polymerase enzymes the viruses use to replicate. Essentially, the first line of defense will block viruses from replicating and causing infection. Now, if this first line of defense fails, or if the virus evolves to resist these compounds, there is a second line of defense this pill offers. This second line of defense involves using a compound called Draco. Instead of targeting viruses directly, like in the first line of defense, this second line uses the cell's own defense systems to make invaded cells commit apoptosis or cell suicide. Draco targets the host cell, not just the virus. Specifically at the cellular level, Draco binds to RNA at one end and signals to the other end to induce cell suicide if the cell is infected. Draco is effective because it causes rapid apoptosis only in infected cells and leaves any uninfected cells unharmed. So how does Draco target only infected cells? It is made up of 2 proteins called PKR and APAF1. When viruses replicate, they usually produce long double-stranded RNA helices during the transcription process. The PKR protein in Draco recognizes these RNA helices, which are present in large amounts only in infected cells. APAF1 then activates the cell's own programmed apoptosis pathway, and this leads to immediate cell death. Draco is essentially a superprotein that doesn't target the virus itself, but instead signals to the infected cell to commit suicide. Our pill takes the advantages of PrEP and Draco to get a super pill called Praco. If Praco is taken once a week, there are adequate levels of antiviral drugs present that can stop viral replication in the case of exposure to an infectious agent. We want to make it so that if there is a possibility of an infection, this pill can be taken every day for added protection. We do not want to become reliant on the drug, so taking it once a week can be used for protection against infectious diseases everywhere. The purpose of this pill is to boost and support our immune systems instead of replacing them to prevent the spread of infectious diseases.
Now, how are we going to distribute these drugs? We're focusing our distribution to the African populations. Africa currently has 15% of the world's population but carries 24% of global diseases. In 2013, it was projected that Africa needs $20.8 billion to treat the diseases, which was a huge jump from $4.7 billion 5 years before. It is also projected that the cost will jump to $65 billion by 2020. These high costs cannot be fulfilled by the African citizens, and that is why it is important to deliver our drugs efficiently at a very low cost. One benefit of Praco is that it is projected to be effective for 5 to 10 years in prevention of the infectious diseases. Along with the long durability, the drugs are expected to be more than 90% preventative when the pills are taken every day for a week. Statistics from the PrEP pill suggest that if 2 pills are taken a week, it is 76% preventative. If 4 pills are taken, it is 96% preventative. And when 7 pills are taken a week, it is 99% preventative. To prevent the infectious disease to the greatest extent possible, we hope that people will be able to take the Praco pill 7 days a week. However, if the costs are too limited, taking 4 pills a week could also be very effective. Praco is a super drug that could be preventative towards most of the infectious diseases, which could replace other drugs used for individual diseases. This is why Praco will be very suitable to apply for the NGO purchase force distribution. NGO, or non-governmental organization, is an organization run for various causes which run mostly by donations and the volunteers around the world. NGO works to produce high volume of drugs with low margin. They try to find creative operations that gives them ability to offer wide range of medicine using their existing system. Specifically, they play a key role in accessing rural areas of Africa in which they are sometimes the only health service provider. One of the biggest goals for NGO is to help in controlling the spread of diseases and conditions such as AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, which are infectious diseases that PRACO could help in preventing. Ultimately, if PRACO could be approved by and funded by NGO for their NGO Purchase First program, PRACO will be most efficiently distributed to a large area of Africa. When the distribution systems are set up, it is advised to give pills to the population every day for a week. But if there are too much financial constraints, providing 4 pills a week will also be very helpful. After PrEP pills were first introduced, HIV decreased by 10% in the United States in just 4 years. Distributing the PrEP pills could be more effective as most of the populations will be taking the pill instead of only few people who took PrEP pill in US. So, within a short period of time, most of the infectious diseases could be prevented by the PrEP pills.
As Dr. Hans Zinzer, a famous researcher and physician at Stanford in the field of infectious diseases, once said, infectious disease is one of the few genuine adventures left in the world. We've been on this so-called adventure for centuries, dating back to the first disease, the Justinian plague, to the most recent Zika epidemic. Infectious diseases have always plagued humanity, and we are slowly working towards living in a world free of infectious disease.
This adventure continues with our super pill, PRACO, which will hopefully end the spread of infectious disease and provide a mechanism to combat the deadly effects that these have had on the history of mankind. Often when a new infectious disease arises, we are usually defenseless, and by the time we find a solution, it is too late.
With PRACO, we hope to end all infectious disease,
ranging from the common cold
to diseases caused by resistant superbugs.